Without a moment's hesitation, Mark Watney rips open the container filled with dehydrated human waste. He pours water into his hands and stirs vigorously until the mixture becomes a thick slurry. Then, at regular intervals, he scoops out a large spoonful of the slurry and spreads it evenly over the sandy soil. Next, he places a raw potato on top and waters it with a large amount of mineral water. Finally, all he has to do is wait a month, and this barren sandy land will produce a miracle. And that is Mark Watney's only hope for survival for the next 3 years. Because this is Mars, a barren planet 60 million kilometers from Earth. He was unexpectedly left behind here. Not long ago, American scientists discovered that Mars has a lower elevation than Earth, and its surface is rugged due to meteorite impacts. After analysis, everyone concluded that the surface of Mars was once very wet, with even more water than the Arctic Ocean. To prove this theory, NASA sent 6 astronauts to Mars to collect soil samples and bring them back to Earth for research. This manned Mars exploration mission was named Ares 3. The 6 astronauts successfully arrived on Mars. After setting up their habitat as quickly as possible, the team began their work professionally. Among the 6 astronauts, the highest authority was Lewis, the mission commander and an outstanding geologist. Mark Watney was the lowest-ranking member of the team. Compared to the others, his strength was botany. A day on Mars is about 39 minutes longer than on Earth due to its rotation period. Today is the 18th Sol Martian day. Lewis leads 4 astronauts out to collect soil samples. Fortunately, with Beck, the team's comedian, the tedious work becomes more interesting. But just as everyone is laughing and talking, astronaut Johansson inside the habitat receives a danger alert and immediately notifies Lewis. "Commander, you should come see this." "A storm warning? I saw it in this morning's report. We'll be inside before it hits." NASA has upgraded the warning. This storm will be worse than expected. Hearing this, Lewis doesn't hesitate. She and the others quickly return to the habitat. Looking at the ferocious storm approaching, Lewis's expression turns serious. If this continues, they will all be in danger. To leave Mars, they must use the MAV Mars Ascent Vehicle, parked outside. According to the latest forecast, the wind speed will reach 8,600 newtons, while the MAV can only withstand a maximum of 7,500 newtons. Once this limit is exceeded, the ship will tip over, and it will all be over. The pressure is on Lewis. She must decide whether to stay and complete the sample collection mission or evacuate urgently before the storm hits. The MAV has only one chance. Only after leaving Mars and returning to the mothership, the Hermes, can they officially begin their journey back to Earth. This also means that if they fail, all their previous efforts will be for nothing. Beck wants to wait a little longer, hoping the storm might weaken or change direction, but Lewis rejects the idea. As commander, her most important duty is to ensure all crew members return home safely. Therefore, she immediately orders a halt to the mission and prepares for an emergency evacuation from Mars. Upon receiving the news, pilot Martinez immediately gets into position on the MAV, ready for takeoff. The remaining 5 astronauts, wearing their spacesuits, leave the habitat and head towards the MAV. The intense storm hits, reducing visibility and making movement more difficult than ever. The team must move with extreme caution. But despite their best efforts, an accident occurs. "Commander, we're tilting at 10 degrees. If we reach 12.3 degrees, the MAV will tip over. We have to stop it. Maybe we can use the cables from the antenna mast as an anchor and tie it to the rover." Just as Beck thinks of a solution, Mark is suddenly struck by an object. He is swept into the violent dust storm, lifted into the air, and disappears into the darkness before his crewmates can react. At the same time, the computer in the habitat emits a piercing alarm. Mark Watney's suit is compromised. Mark's signal completely disappears from the radar screen. The atmospheric pressure on Mars is only about 1% of Earth's. In such a harsh environment, no one can survive for more than a minute without the protection of a spacesuit. The team frantically calls Mark's name, but only receives the terrifying silence of the howling storm in return. Lewis tries to search for Mark, but the storm grows stronger, sweeping away everything in sight. Mark's suit is breached, and his location beacon is offline, making it impossible for the computer to pinpoint his position. Just then the MAV shakes violently again, signaling imminent danger. If they don't leave immediately, they will all die here. Lewis makes the heartbreaking decision to declare a retreat after a futile search for Mark. Returning to the mothership Hermes, Lewis reports the incident to NASA. Director Teddy immediately holds a press conference to announce the sad news of astronaut Mark Watney's sacrifice. Thanks to Commander Lewis's decisive action, the 5 remaining members of Ares 3 were able to escape in the nick of time. Astronauts Beck, Johansson, Martinez, and Vogel boarded the MAV in time and initiated the emergency launch procedure at 7:28 a.m. Central Standard Time. Unfortunately, during the evacuation, astronaut Mark Watney was struck by debris and was killed. Lewis and her grieving crewmates leave Mars on the Hermes, beginning their journey back to Earth. Mark Watney was dead. But then a miracle happened. After the storm subsided, Mark unexpectedly wakes up on Mars. The object that hit him was the antenna from the satellite dish used for communication with the habitat. This antenna pierced his spacesuit, damaging his life-monitoring equipment, which led the system to believe he was dead. But this very impact inadvertently saved his life. The antenna lodged in his abdomen, and the blood that flowed out, mixed with the antenna fragments, sealed the tear in his suit. Additionally, Mark fell face down, which slowed the rate of air leakage from his suit. Thanks to this, he survived the terrifying storm. Mark stumbles back to the habitat and performs surgery on his own wound. Although he narrowly escaped death, he quickly realizes his current situation is extremely dangerous. The damaged satellite dish means he can't contact his crew or NASA. Time passes. On the 21st Sol on Mars, after 3 days of rest, Mark gradually recovers. Now, he must find a way to prolong his life and wait for a chance to be rescued. He hopes NASA will discover he is still alive and launch a rescue plan. On the other hand, although the Ares 3 mission was cut short, NASA had already planned for Ares 4. This is Mark's only chance of survival. But the bad news is that the manned rocket for the Ares 4 mission won't arrive on Mars for another 4 years. This means that if NASA doesn't find him, Mark will have to survive on this planet by himself for 4 years, which is almost impossible. Thinking of this, Mark hastily searches the entire habitat. To survive, he needs enough food. Fortunately, the original plan was for 6 astronauts to stay on Mars for 31 sols. As a precaution, NASA had prepared 68 sols worth of food for each person. His crewmates left on the 18th sol. So, there's still enough food for 6 people for 50 sols in the habitat. Alone, Mark can eat for 300 days, maybe even longer if he rations it. Surviving for 400 days might not be a big problem, but 400 days compared to 4 years is a huge gap. If he's really unlucky, Mark will have to stay on Mars for 4 years. So he has to find a way to get more food for the remaining 3 years. Fortunately, NASA, worrying the astronauts would get tired of the prepackaged meals, had left some potatoes in the habitat's kitchen in case they wanted to show off their cooking skills. And Mark found them. This discovery makes Mark incredibly excited because, besides being an astronaut, he is also a botanist. Growing potatoes on Mars? To others it might seem absurd, but to Mark, it's a new and fascinating challenge. Besides, the one thing he has in abundance now is time. If he succeeds, he will not only have more food to survive but also create a huge shock in the world of botany. To grow potatoes, 3 elements are needed: soil, water, and light. The Martian soil is barren, lacking the necessary nutrients for plant growth. But Mark is not discouraged. He immediately thinks of a wonderful natural fertilizer source: the crew's waste. After solving the soil problem, Mark spends a few days building a simple greenhouse. He mixes the soil and fertilizer, then carefully plants the halved potatoes. Once all this is done, Mark faces a new challenge: how to get enough water for irrigation. There is stored drinking water in the habitat, but Mark doesn't dare risk using it. He needs to ensure he has enough drinking water for himself. At night, while watching American movies, he thinks, the reserve water can't be used, so he has to make his own. His high school chemistry knowledge comes flooding back. Hydrogen combined with oxygen creates water. Oxygen is easy. The oxygenator in the habitat can continuously convert oxygen from the Martian atmosphere. So where to get hydrogen? Before long, Mark remembers the lander left behind after they landed. It still contains several hundred liters of unused hydrazine fuel. The chemical formula for hydrazine is N2H4. Now, Mark needs to separate the nitrogen and hydrogen from this compound. He connects a hose to the lander and extracts a container of hydrazine fuel. Then, he drops the fuel bit by bit onto some precious metals used as a catalyst. A reaction occurs, separating the hydrogen and nitrogen. Mark collects the hydrogen in a sealed container. Finally, he uses wires to burn sawdust to create a flame, igniting the hydrogen and creating precious drops of water. Just as he's about to celebrate his brilliant success, an accident occurs. Mark is thrown back by an explosion. Fortunately, he is not seriously injured, just a few minor scratches on his head and ringing in his ears. Mark realizes he miscalculated. He didn't account for the oxygen in his own breath, which increased the oxygen concentration and caused the explosion. That's how it is with chemistry experiments. The slightest mistake can have huge consequences. But Mark is not one to give up easily. After learning from his mistake, he quickly starts the experiment a second time. This time, Mark wears full protective gear, ensuring there is no excess oxygen in the experiment area. He carefully lights the flame again, and the experiment is a success. The reason Mark dared to conduct such a risky experiment, besides his perseverance, is a story related to the birth of JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. In other words, it was JPL that helped create NASA as we know it today. After creating water, he begins his potato growing plan. With the food problem temporarily solved, he turns his attention to maintaining the habitat's operations. The mission was originally planned for only 31 days. No one expected an accident. If Mark has to stay here for 4 years, many pieces of equipment will need regular maintenance, like the water reclaimer and the solar panels. Time flies when you're busy. 54 sols have passed on Mars, and Mark discovers the first potato sprouts have emerged in the greenhouse, a small patch of green carrying hope and vibrant life. While Mark is busy growing potatoes on Mars back on Earth, his funeral is being held. NASA Director Teddy personally presides over the ceremony to express his condolences and honor Mark, delivering a moving speech. Everyone believes Mark is dead, but after the funeral, Vincent, the Mars mission director, approaches Teddy. He wants access to the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. The 6 astronauts of the Ares 3 mission were the best of the best selected by Vincent. Moreover, Mark's body has not been found. Therefore, Vincent still holds out hope. He wants to use the excuse of checking the probes on Mars to see if Mark is still alive. But his request is denied by Director Teddy, citing the need to avoid media complications. In reality, he's worried that if the satellite captures images of Mark's body, NASA will face harsh public criticism, and securing funding from Congress will become even more difficult. Seeing he can't convince Teddy, Vincent finds another way. He decides to bypass the official request procedure and sends a secret email directly to Mindy Park, a satellite communications officer at NASA. Mindy doesn't know what Vincent is planning. She just carefully checks and compares the coordinates in the email. And to her surprise, after comparing satellite images taken on Sol 18 and Sol 25 on Mars, Mindy makes a startling discovery. She hurriedly calls the security department, asking them to contact Vincent immediately. At 2:30 a.m. Earth time, Vincent, Communications Director Annie, and Director Teddy gather at the command center. Seeing the difference between the 2 satellite photos, they are all stunned. The difference is the position of Rover 1 and the solar panels next to the habitat, which show signs of being cleaned. According to the activity log before leaving Mars, Commander Lewis had plugged Rover 2 into charge at the habitat. But now the rover has clearly been moved. There is no evidence of anyone else living on Mars. So the only logical explanation is that Mark is still alive, and even living quite well. If Mark were in danger, he certainly wouldn't have time to repair and clean equipment. This conclusion bewilders Director Teddy. He even rejects Annie's suggestion to consult with Lewis about the rover's position. The reason he gives is to avoid worrying Mark's crewmates. They have 10 months left to get home. Space travel is dangerous. They need to stay focused and not be distracted. They still believe Mark is dead. If they knew he was alive but left behind, they would be devastated. Hearing this, Annie can only remain silent. If this incident gets out, NASA will surely be heavily attacked, and her communications department will bear the brunt of public opinion. According to information laws, NASA must publish these satellite images online within 24 hours. Faced with this situation, Director Teddy is forced to accept Annie's proposal to hold an emergency press conference before the public discovers the truth, announcing that Mark Watney is still alive. However, when faced with questions from reporters, Director Teddy can only answer vaguely. What have you done to contact Mark Watney? We are doing everything we can. Does he have enough supplies to survive? We will investigate this. How does this affect NASA? Will you resign? Meanwhile, 60 million kilometers from Earth, Mark is still chilling to disco music, completely unaware that the news of his survival has shocked the world. Time flies. On the 70th Sol on Mars, after solving the food problem, Mark begins to make a long-term plan. According to the data he has, the Ares 4 mission will land in the Schiaparelli crater, 3,200 kilometers away, in 4 years. If he wants to leave Mars, Mark must get there before then. And this is the most difficult problem. Mark only has Rover 2 for work. After traveling 35 kilometers, he has to return to the habitat to recharge. If he takes the batteries from the broken Rover 1 and combines them with Rover 2, he could travel 70 kilometers per day. The destination is 3,200 kilometers away. At a maximum daily travel distance, he would need at least 50 days to get there. This means Mark would have to live in the rover for 50 days, while also carrying a life support system the size of a small truck. After considering these issues, Mark decides to try a test run. But after a few attempts, he realizes that not only has he not solved the old problem, but a new one has arisen. The Martian atmosphere is mainly carbon dioxide, extremely thin and cold. The average temperature can drop to minus 63 degrees Celsius, and it's even colder at night. If he stays in the rover without the heater on, Mark will freeze to death. But turning on the heater will consume half the energy. Therefore, how to stay warm becomes the most pressing issue. On the 79th Sol on Mars, Mark finds a solution. using a radioisotope thermoelectric generator, RTG. To prevent a power failure from jeopardizing the Ares 3 mission, NASA had prepared a backup device, this RTG. This type of generator uses energy from radioactive decay, and is commonly used for artificial satellites, space probes, and other remote devices when fuel supplies are scarce or solar panels are not working. The RTG is the most ideal power source. However, when Lewis and her crew arrived on Mars, this RTG was buried because it uses plutonium-238, a radioactive substance hundreds of times more powerful than the uranium-239 used in nuclear weapons. Mark is also very anxious about doing this, but he has no other choice. As long as he doesn't break it and cause it to leak, there won't be a major problem. He digs up the RTG, brings it into the rover's cabin, and secures it carefully with straps. The truth proves Mark's decision was absolutely right. In just a moment, the temperature inside the rover rises to 20 degrees Celsius. And more importantly, Mark doesn't have to worry about how long it will last, because as long as the plutonium-238 is decaying, it will generate an endless source of heat. The half-life of plutonium-238 is 88 years. Talk about built to last. While Mark is busy on Mars, Earth begins its rescue plan. Through the daily satellite images, NASA notices that Mark is moving farther and farther with Rover 2. They easily guess his intention is to reach the Ares 4 landing site. Director Teddy believes that what Mark needs most right now is food, so he decides to send him more supplies by launching a spacecraft before the Ares 4 mission begins. But he has no idea that Mark has already managed to grow potatoes on Mars. Teddy contacts Brooks, the director of JPL, and learns that the fastest supply plan would still take 9 months. Everyone can wait, but Mark can't. So Director Teddy orders Brooks to shorten the plan to 3 months, while also providing an unlimited budget. After Teddy makes the arrangements, Mitch, the flight director for the Hermes, speaks up. He believes they should inform Lewis and the other astronauts on the Hermes that Mark is still alive. They have a right to know. He had mentioned this several times before. Mitch thought that with more people in the meeting today, Teddy wouldn't be able to refuse, but he was disappointed. When we have a concrete rescue plan, we'll tell them. There's no point in telling them now. At the same time on Mars, after 48 days of hard work, Mark's efforts have paid off. The potatoes have grown better than expected. He carefully digs them up, saving the large ones and replanting the small ones. Looking at the 400 lush green potato plants before him, Mark feels incredibly proud. But he doesn't forget his main mission is to leave this place, not to stay and be a potato farmer on Mars. Unfortunately, despite trying many methods, Mark still can't contact Earth. Until one day, while looking at a map of Mars, he suddenly has an idea. The next day, Mark drives the rover to search for something near the habitat. This action quickly attracts Earth's attention. Mindy, under Director Teddy's orders, is granted higher access to use the satellite to track Mark's every move. Seeing that Mark hasn't moved towards the Ares 4 landing site for 13 days, but is just circling near the habitat, Mindy is confused. She doesn't understand what Mark is planning. At first, Vincent is also unsure, but when he thinks about Mark's movement pattern, he quickly guesses his intention. Vincent immediately flies to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California to search for an artifact from 1997. Under Brooks' guidance, he meets the former members of that project. Almost at the same time, Mark on Mars and Vincent on Earth exclaim a name: Pathfinder. On December 4, 1996, NASA launched the Pathfinder probe. Half a year later, it landed successfully on the surface of Mars. Pathfinder carried a rover that collected data about Mars and sent it back to Earth. Notably, Pathfinder operated for 3 times longer than NASA had expected. After its mission ended, it was left on Mars until it was buried by dust and sand. Mark took a great deal of effort to dig it up, hoping to use its communication equipment to connect with Earth. NASA has a habit. Each probe usually has 2 identical versions. The original purpose was not for backup, but for convenient observation and improvement. One was launched into space to perform the mission, while the other remained on Earth. Simply put, they are like a monitor screen and the device being monitored. When Vincent finds Pathfinder in the warehouse on Mars, Mark has also brought the other Pathfinder back to the habitat and successfully booted it up. Everyone works their hardest, prepares thoroughly, and focuses intensely for this crucial moment. Initiating tracking system. Signal received. Initiating camera. The Pathfinder on Earth receives the command, and its small neat camera extends. The Pathfinder on Mars does the same. Although it's unclear whether this action is an automatic program after being powered on or remotely controlled, Mark immediately runs back to the habitat, finds cardboard and a pen. He writes a question with 2 answers on some signs, then places them in front of the Pathfinder, waiting for a response. Upon receiving the image, the team on Earth controls the camera to point towards the sign with the word, "Yes." Mark is overjoyed. After being stranded on Mars for over 100 days, He has finally contacted Earth through his own efforts. A small step on Mars, a giant leap to bring Mark home. However, both sides quickly realize that this method of communication is too simple. Yes and a no cannot convey complex information. Mark faces another tough problem. How to use the camera's rotation angle to talk to Earth. The camera can rotate 360 degrees. The English alphabet has 26 letters, plus a question mark, for a total of 27 options. If 360 degrees were divided evenly, each letter would correspond to 13 degrees, which is too narrow and easy to misinterpret. It's often said that in the most desperate situations, people reveal their extraordinary potential. Mark is living proof of that. Growing potatoes on Mars was hard, yet he did it. Creating a new alphabet? Piece of cake. And the solution Mark comes up with in this urgent moment is hexadecimal ASCII code. Remembering this code, Mark reduces the 26 letters to 17 characters and plants corresponding signs around the camera. Upon receiving the image, the team on Earth understands Mark's intention, and they do the same on Earth, arranging everything identically. After being able to have complex conversations, the team on Earth uses hex code to guide Mark on how to hack into Pathfinder's communication system. Finally, after decoding a snippet of code, Mark successfully connects to the laptop in his rover and can chat with Earth. Looking at the messages coming from Earth for the first time, Mark feels the power of words. After a moment of overwhelming emotion, he excitedly chats away. Establishing an internet connection allows Earth to understand Mark's situation. NASA is overjoyed until Mark asks a question. How are my crewmates? What did they say when they found out I'm still alive? Seeing that question, the whole meeting room falls silent. Director Teddy's face darkens. Because of his directive, the astronauts on the Hermes still don't know Mark is alive. Not getting a reply, Mark sends another email. The atmosphere becomes increasingly awkward. Vincent is forced to tell the truth. We haven't told the crew you're alive. We want them to focus on the mission. The journey is dangerous. Unexpectedly, Mark immediately gets angry. He feels he's being treated like an inanimate object. Mark pours out his heart in angry messages. Everyone bursts out laughing when they read the messages, except for Director Teddy. Vincent reminds Mark to watch his words, as the conversation is being broadcast live globally. But Mark's next reply shocks everyone even more. Afterward, the NASA leadership meets to discuss whether to inform Lewis and the others on the Hermes that Mark is alive. Because Mark's emotional reaction was so strong, Mitch is adamant about telling them, but his position isn't high enough to make the decision. However, the live broadcast has had too great an impact. Reluctantly, under public pressure, Teddy is forced to concede. Not long after, the Hermes receives a video file. Lewis and her crewmates finally learn that Mark is still alive. Hello, I'm Mitch. Mitch Henderson. I have some news, and there's no easy way to say this. Mark Watney is still alive. I know you're shocked. I know you have a lot of questions, but basically he's okay and very healthy. Henderson emphasizes in the video that Mark understands being left behind was unavoidable, and doesn't blame anyone. But the more he says this, the more guilt everyone feels. The atmosphere on the Hermes is filled with regret and sadness. On Mars, although Mark was angry about the previous conversation with Earth, after calming down, he tries to put himself in their shoes. After all, the current situation is much better than before. He can not only show off his potato-growing achievements to his colleagues on Earth, but also exchange emails and share interesting stories. While Mark is happily posing for the camera, back on Earth, Director Teddy is stressed. He meets with senior leaders about the progress of the rescue plan. Experts carefully calculate, numbering each precious potato, and the result is disheartening. The potatoes are only enough for Mark to survive until Sol 868, while NASA's supply package won't arrive until Sol 912. The gap is only 44 days and everything has to go smoothly or Mark will starve. But disaster strikes on Sol 134. The airlock used to pressurize the habitat unexpectedly explodes during operation. The explosion happens so suddenly that Mark is thrown outside. Fortunately, Mark is not injured, but the visor of his helmet is cracked. Previously, when he had his first accident, Mark had said that if exposed to the low-pressure environment on Mars, a person couldn't survive for more than a minute. Mark knows this well, so as soon as he discovers his helmet is damaged, he patches the crack with tape. Then Mark runs to the potato greenhouse. The breach in the room caused the air to rush in, and combined with the -60 to -70 degrees Celsius temperature at night, all 400 potato plants have frozen to death. Mark is completely devastated, sinking into despair. He can't believe how unlucky he is. Even his glimmer of hope has been snatched away. Earth quickly learns of Mark's accident. The rescue plan, already urgent, becomes even more difficult. Without the potatoes, the food reserves are only enough for Mark until Sol 609, while the supply package won't arrive until Sol 868. The gap is over 200 days. Vincent can't believe his eyes. How can Mark hold on until then? Can he survive? Director Teddy is also helpless, only able to put more pressure on JPL, demanding they build and assemble the spacecraft within 47 days. Hearing this, Brooks can only hold his head in his hands. Meanwhile, on Mars, after confiding in his crewmates on the Hermes, Mark gradually regains his spirits. No matter what happens, life must go on. He returns to the greenhouse and harvests the remaining potatoes from the soil. After all, they are the fruit of his labor. Then, Mark finds a plastic tarp to repair the damaged habitat. Fortunately, the habitat has more than one airlock, so Mark can still sleep soundly instead of curling up in the rover. Time passes. On Sol 154 on Mars, without the greenhouse, Mark's life becomes more difficult. He has to ration his food carefully. Back on Earth, thanks to the efforts of the JPL engineers, the supply spacecraft is assembled ahead of schedule. But worried that Mark won't hold on, Director Teddy again orders JPL to shorten the assembly time from 13 days to 2, even skipping the inspection phase. Everyone knows this is very risky, but they have no other choice. The launch day arrives quickly. All of NASA watches nervously, because the success or failure of this launch determines Mark's life. The rocket launches successfully. Everything seems fine. Everyone thinks this time it will surely succeed. But smooth seas don't make for an interesting story. Not long after launch, the rocket begins to wobble violently, its deviation angle increasing, and finally, the rocket, built in just a few months, inevitably explodes. Since he can now communicate with Earth, Mark immediately learns that the supply rocket has failed. Looking at the desolate landscape of Mars, thinking about his own lack of a chance to survive, Mark is completely desperate. He sends an email to Lewis, which is essentially his will. Commander Lewis, I might need your help with something. If I die, please visit my parents. They'll want to know about our life on Mars. I know this is uncomfortable. Talking to a couple about their dead son will be very difficult. This is an awful request, which is why I'm asking you. I'm not giving up. We just need to be prepared for any eventuality. Please tell them. Tell them I loved my job. Mark has no idea that his rescue operation has captured the world's attention. After watching NASA's interview about the failed rocket launch, the deputy director of the China National Space Administration speaks up. Our Taiyuanshan booster rocket. Our engineers have checked the data. It has enough capability to reach Mars orbit. Although helping the US means China's Taiyuanshan plan will be delayed, from a broader perspective, the head of the Chinese Space Agency believes it is well worth it. He calls Director Teddy, and with China's help, NASA launches the second rescue plan for Mark. Faced with Mark's dwindling food supply, Director Teddy decides to stick with the old plan. Send food supplies to Mark first. But unexpectedly, a black man objects. His name is Rich Purnell, an astrodynamics expert at JPL. Since being assigned to Mark's rescue, Rich has been tirelessly researching, looking for a more effective plan. He has used a supercomputer, staying up for many nights. If he weren't already dark-skinned, Rich would surely have massive bags under his eyes. But every effort is worth it. After perfecting his theory, Rich hurries to meet with Vincent and the others to present his plan, in which the key element is the Hermes, which is on its way back to Earth. Rich's plan is that after the Hermes enters Earth's orbit, instead of decelerating, the ship will accelerate and fly around the Earth once. This will give the Hermes a gravity assist slingshot and allow it to adjust its course. During this process, the Taiyuanshan rocket will provide supplies and a propulsion engine to the Hermes. After receiving the supplies, the Hermes will accelerate towards Mars. Mark just needs to get to the Ares 4 landing site, then use the MAV to fly into a near-Mars orbit to wait for rescue. The advantage of this plan is that it shortens the time. The disadvantage is that the 5 astronauts on the Hermes will have to work overtime for an additional 533 days. At their current speed, they only need another month to return to Earth. There's also the safety issue. Even using Rich's method for the Hermes to pick up Mark, the entire journey will take over 500 days. No one knows what will happen. Whether the ship can operate until it returns to Earth is also a big question. So the key issue comes back to a choice. Let Mark face a known danger alone, or let the 5 astronauts on the Hermes risk unknown dangers. This is a difficult decision. Mitch Henderson believes the 5 astronauts on the Hermes should decide for themselves whether to go back and save Mark. But Teddy disagrees. As the director of NASA, he always looks at the problem from a macro perspective. Between sacrificing one person and risking the lives of 5, he leans towards the second option. This somewhat conservative decision once again causes a heated argument between him and Henderson. While everyone on Earth is debating fiercely over Mark, the man at the center of it all, after so many mishaps, seems to have seen the light. Thinking he has nothing better to do, Mark decides to continue the unfinished mission of Ares 3. Who says boring work wears people down? After working continuously for several days, Mark not only doesn't feel tired, but his spirits have become more optimistic. After the argument with Teddy, Henderson still decides to do things his way. He sends information about Rich's rescue plan to the 5 astronauts on the Hermes for them to decide. To avoid being detected by Teddy, he disguises the information as an attachment sent within an email to one of the astronauts. Johansson, the computer expert, quickly recognizes that this attachment is a disguised text code. After decoding it, the content is Rich's plan, extremely complete and detailed. Knowing this plan, Lewis gathers her crewmates and decides to hold a secret vote. If we do this, we'll be in space for over 900 days. We'll definitely never get a chance to fly in space for this long a second time in our lives. I'm in. All 5 unanimously agree to act. Under Lewis's direction, each person is assigned a specific task according to Rich's plan. The Hermes needs to accelerate as it enters Earth's orbit. So before arriving, Lewis and her crewmates keep it a secret, not revealing any information. NASA is completely unaware, still eagerly preparing for the Hermes' return ceremony. By the time they discover the anomaly, it's too late. Got an unscheduled status update from Hermes. Read it out. The message is, Houston, be advised. Rich Purnell is a steely-eyed missile man. What? Guidance, Commander, Hermes is off course. Contact them. Their off-course report. Guidance. Ready to upload course correction. No, Commander. They're not off course. They've altered their course. What the hell is going on? The incident is quickly reported up the chain of command. Director Teddy, of course, knows who is behind this plan. But what's done is done. He can only follow Rich's plan and implement the next steps of the rescue operation. However, the feeling of being forced makes Teddy very uncomfortable. He confronts Henderson and says bluntly, "After this is over, I want your resignation." "I understand. Let's get our astronauts home." The Hermes is on its way back to Mars. On Mars, Mark also begins preparations for his journey home. Each Ares mission is planned 3 years in advance, and the MAV is also brought to the landing site beforehand. In other words, although the Ares 4 mission hasn't started, the Ares 4 MAV is already waiting at the Schiaparelli crater, 3,200 kilometers from Mark. Mark needs to pack all the necessities for survival onto the rover, then drive 3,200 kilometers to the Schiaparelli crater, use the MAV to fly into a near-Mars orbit to meet the Hermes. Mark has over 200 days to prepare. He needs to modify the rover, prepare supplies, and plan for unexpected situations. If it were before, Mark might have given up, but now he can communicate with Earth and the whole world is watching him. With the help of top experts, Mark's preparations go much more smoothly. The Hermes and the Taiyang-Shan supply ship have successfully docked. Now all they can do is wait. Time flies. On Sol 461 on Mars, Mark has completed all preparations. He is about to shut down the habitat systems and begin his 50-day journey across Mars. Thinking about having to eat and live in the rover for 50 days, before setting off, Mark takes a good shower. Everything is ready. Mark drives the modified rover and sets off. Because he needs to use solar panels to charge the vehicle during the day, Mark only travels at night. Luckily, there are no traffic police on Mars, or he would have lost his license immediately. Back to the story. Compared to Mark's smooth journey, things on Earth are a bit turbulent. Brooks, the director of JPL, discovers a problem that hadn't been considered before. According to the original Ares 3 plan, the Hermes would not enter a near-Mars orbit, so the amount of fuel prepared was based on that calculation. Therefore, even if it reaches Mars, the Hermes can only dock with the MAV in an outer orbit to ensure enough fuel for the return journey to Earth. The problem is, the MAV can only fly to a low Mars orbit. For Mark to escape Mars's gravity and connect with the Hermes, he has to travel at a very high speed. That's right. This means we need to reduce the weight of the MAV. We need to lose over 5 tons. At this point, dismantling the MAV is the best option to reduce weight. But after hearing Brooks's explanation, even Henderson, with decades of flying experience, is startled by the bold idea. Since it can be remotely controlled by the Hermes, Mark doesn't need the backup control panel, or the secondary and tertiary communication systems. They can be completely removed to reduce weight. The 6 spacesuits and equipment can also be reduced to just Mark's. This could save 500 kilograms. The life support system is also unnecessary. Mark just needs to wear his spacesuit throughout the flight. Vincent can still accept these things. But Brooks's next words make him question whether this operation is to save Mark, or to turn him into space junk. We need to remove the windows and panel 19 on the roof of the pressurized cabin. You want to take the roof off the ship? That panel alone weighs 400 kilograms. You want to send a man into space in an open-topped ship? We'll have Mark cover the MAV with a tarp. Vincent can't believe that reducing weight would turn the MAV into a convertible. Brooks's words are completely beyond his comprehension. And the person who is also speechless at this plan is Mark. Hearing that he will have to sit in an open-topped ship and fly into space, He angrily messages NASA back. Are you kidding me? It's a good thing email doesn't have voice or video functions, or Vincent would know just how much Mark was cursing at that moment. But Mark has one good quality. No matter how angry he gets, he knows how to listen. After all, he's already on his way. Turning back would be a waste of effort. He might as well roll the dice. Maybe a bicycle will turn into a motorcycle. On Sol 538 on Mars, Mark arrives at the Schiaparelli crater. The Ares 4 MAV has been waiting there for a long time. After a rest, Mark begins the weight reduction plan. He follows Brooks's plan, removing everything he can, then covering the roof with a tarp. More than 20 days later, the Hermes reaches near Mars orbit. During a meal, Lewis reviews the rescue plan for the crew. Beck and Vogel are tasked with opening airlock 2 before the MAV launches. Martinez will remotely pilot Mark's MAV. Johansson will monitor the MAV's ascent. Since there is only one chance, after assigning tasks, Lewis emphasizes to her crewmates that they must be extremely careful. They must bring Mark back safely at all costs. Before the MAV launch, Mark is a bit nervous. The joy of soon returning home mixed with fear makes him a little unsettled. From the moment he set foot on Mars until he was about to leave, Mark had been here for over 500 days. He survived the toughest days thanks to potatoes and reached the hope of return thanks to his rover. Therefore, when he has to leave this place, Mark feels a little regretful. If he could, he would want to bring the rover back to Earth with him. At the same time on Earth, Mark's rescue plan is being hyped up by the media. Mark straightens his clothes and quietly sits in the cockpit. It isn't until he hears Lewis's voice from the radio that he realizes he isn't dreaming. Control, this is Hermes. We are go for plan. 2 minutes, 10 seconds to launch. About 2 minutes, Watney. How you doing? I'm good. I'm really looking forward to seeing you guys. Thanks for coming back for me. The 10-second countdown ends. Mark's MAV launches successfully. Joy mixed with anxiety makes everyone watching this event hold their breath in suspense. Because a successful launch is only the first and easiest step in the rescue plan. The MAV's speed increases under the effect of gravity. Mark passes out. The tarp covering the MAV is blown away by the wind. And the accidents don't stop there. According to calculations, when the fuel runs out, the distance between the MAV and the Hermes will still be 68 kilometers. The only way is for the Hermes to fire its thrusters to accelerate, decrease altitude, and approach Mark. But doing so will increase the relative speed between the two ships to 42 meters per second, exceeding expectations. This is an impossible task for the person catching Mark. Just then Mark regains consciousness. He contacts the Hermes and learns of the difficulty they are facing. The trials of the past have forged in him a will of steel. After some thought, Mark suggests, if I can find something sharp, I'll puncture the glove of my suit. I'll use the stream of air as a thruster to fly towards you. It will be easy to control because it's right on my arm. Unexpectedly, Lewis immediately rejects this proposal. She has thought of a better way. Have Vogel, the chemistry expert, create a bomb to blow open the Hermes' airlock door, using the escaping air to decelerate. This way they can reduce the relative speed to a normal level. NASA approves Lewis's plan. Although it's risky, they have no other choice. Vogel receives the order and goes to the galley, using sugar mixed with other ingredients to create a bomb. Although simple, its explosive power is very strong. Everything is ready. The bomb is detonated, blowing open the outer door of airlock 2, and at the same time, reducing the relative speed between the Hermes and Mark to 12 meters per second. But this number is still higher than expected. Without hesitation, Lewis puts on a spacesuit and goes to airlock 2. With Beck's help, she sits in a chair attached to the airlock door, floating outside the Hermes, ready to catch Mark. Seeing his crewmates risk their lives for him, Mark is deeply moved. When he gets close, Mark sees the Hermes. He seizes the opportunity and punctures his glove. After a dizzying spin, Mark quickly adjusts his direction, launches himself from the MAV, and flies towards Lewis. Distance to target 24 meters, 11 meters, 6 meters. Hold on to me. I've got him. With Beck's help, Lewis and Mark are pulled safely into the Hermes. At NASA, everyone waiting anxiously also hears the good news over the radio. They all erupt in joy and emotion. Passing through the airlock, removing his helmet, Mark hugs his crewmates tightly. The 2-year-long rescue plan has ended successfully. Now they just need to wait a few hundred more days to return safely to Earth. Today's story ends here. Thank you for watching. What did you think of this movie? Please comment below.